Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting edition of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Vaughn Smith, and this is our Cisco CCNA course for exam 200-301. We're traveling through our network components section, and this episode, we're going to talk about the Cisco DNA Center. Yep, that's right. And here he is, Mr. Ronnie Wong, to help us through. How's it going?
It's going well, Vaughn. Thank you again for joining us as we continue to take a look at different networking components. And no, we are not actually doing a DNA match here, just like you actually see other products out there that show you your lineage, your history, and every place that you're actually involved from. But just in case, right, the very fact is Cisco really does push off that idea that we're actually developing into a new realm and actually taking a look at the idea of the blueprint of our network. And so the DNA Center is going to help us to be able to do this. That's what we're going to be jumping into.
I like what you just did there, Ronnie. That was good. The blueprints, the DNA.
Yeah.
Well done, sir.
Well, there you go. Yeah. So Vaughn, as we begin here, okay, what we want to talk about, of course, is this idea of, well, what the heck is the DNA Center? And then why in the world do we really need it, okay? So the easiest way to actually kind of explain this a little bit is let's take a look at my computer, and this will at least get us started. So Vaughn, we've seen this diagram before, at least in the course of our episodes that we've been doing so far. Essentially just a basic topology. It's not the most complex network in the world, but it shows essentially all of the different components that we're really focused in on, at least for the Cisco CCNA for right now, okay? So Vaughn, in all these components, especially the networking components that we see, the router, the idea of the next generation firewalls, the layer 3, layer 2 switches, wireless LAN controllers, everything else that we see here. Vaughn, all those devices are essentially configurable for our network, okay? So that means, Vaughn, you can go to the access point if you want to. Now, it depends on whether it's a lightweight access point or not, but if it's a standard access point, you can configure the way that access point works, right? So you can go and do that. But Vaughn, then you can also go in and configure the switch that is connected to. So Vaughn, when you do that, you actually go to the access point first. You might have to do some configuration on there. And then Vaughn, you jump into the switch and you might have to do a bit of configuration there. And then you realize, oh yeah, I wanted to work with a wireless LAN controller with the access points. Now Vaughn, you have to go in and jump into the wireless LAN controller, do configuration there. And then you realize, oh yeah, I need this to actually work along with the firewall. So Vaughn, you now jump from the idea of the access point to the switch, to the wireless LAN controller, to the firewall itself, getting that configured and doing all the things that you want to do to allow traffic to do whatever we want to. And then once you get that, Vaughn, you're not done yet. You go to the router. You also have to configure that to also work and do everything else that you want to as well. So Vaughn, in every step along the way, the management of this type of network seems to be a little bit more what we call the idea of administratively intensive, or it's high effort, right?
It sounds like you're running around everywhere. You know, I'm assuming, I'm not assuming, I'm just kind of picturing this like maybe being in like different buildings and in different places. And yeah, it might be in like, you're just logging into different terminals, but it's still that whole idea of that manual procedure of going to each individual piece. Sounds like there's a more efficient way to do this.
Yeah, there is a more efficient way, but just trying to understand, at least in this concept, right? All those devices, essentially, we have to put some type of connection to it so that we can manage it in some way, right?
Because they are their own piece. So every piece does have to be configured individually. But like I was saying, like, so you have to keep them separate, but there's probably a way we can centralize everything.
That's right. So Vaughn, that's what we were getting to, is that the Cisco DNA Center helps us do this. Now, Vaughn, the other advantage, though, of using something like this is not only the centralized management for things like configuration, okay? But it's also the idea here of a couple of other things too. Now, Vaughn, by doing something like I just described here, okay? So Vaughn, let's just put this as a theoretical, right? That you know how to work with each and every one of those pieces of equipment that we just mentioned, okay? So Vaughn, you go ahead and you do that. Now, Vaughn, let's go ahead and put another theoretical in here. Let's say that I know how to work with those pieces of equipment as well. So Vaughn, what are the chances that you and I are going to work with those pieces of equipment exactly in the same way?
We probably will have we get to the same end result, but maybe get there a different way.
Right. Sometimes you might have go, well, I'm not going to work at it the way that Ronnie works at it because his logic seems backward from the way that I like to do things.
Yeah.
So you may work at it differently, but you may also initialize or configure something the way that you choose to and not exactly the same way that I choose to. So Vaughn, when we start doing this type of high administrative effort type of management and configuration, it can lead to some, well, inconsistent results, right? Just between you and me doing the configuration as well, okay? So the Cisco DNA Center helps us in that fact by allowing us to do administrative management really from a single management portal, exactly like what Vaughn was talking about, a centralized particular type of portal here. And that is really the surface and the beginning though, Vaughn, okay? Because what we're actually doing, and Vaughn mentioned it, right, is that every single one of these devices that we touch, it requires some additional effort to doing so. And she actually kind of described it in a kind of neat way, right? It seems like that the devices are actually telling me where I need to go and what I need to do. And that's essentially the way that we've been doing management in terms of networking equipment. Vaughn, and that means that we're actually being told by the devices, you need to come and fix me. You need to do this. It's not ideal, okay? The Cisco DNA Center wants to turn that on its head in this way. It actually works instead of the idea of the devices managing us, right? It says what we want to do is we want to learn how to manage those devices, and they call it, and there's a phrase that they actually use, Vaughn. It's called the idea, make sure I'm actually saying it right, intent-based networking, okay? So not intense as far as your intensity goes, but your intent in the way that you want things to be configured, okay? So Vaughn, in other words, it says you want the goal to be what you want the network to be, okay? So Vaughn, the Cisco DNA Center says, we start with that idea of we know exactly what it is that you want the network to actually be configured like. We know what you want in the wireless access controller. We know what the switches are supposed to be like. We know what the router is supposed to be like. We understand what the firewalls are supposed to be like here, okay? So Vaughn, in that sense, what it means that what you and I actually start to do is essentially program or we configure the Cisco DNA Center, and it says, I can carry out your intent, okay? What do you want this to look like? What do you want this to do? How do you want this done? And the Cisco DNA Center says, leave it up to me, and I will be able to carry out your intent. Vaughn, what that takes out of the system, right, is whether you and I are deciding who did it correctly. Vaughn looks and goes, Ron, I can't believe Ronnie did it this way. It's so annoying that he did this way because I would have never done it that way. Instead, the Cisco DNA Center says, just tell me what you want to done, and I will actually be able to do it exactly the way that it needs to be, and I will carry out your ultimate intent. So Vaughn, that sounds a bit more like we're managing the devices instead, right?
Yeah, I mean, it also, I think I've said this in the series already, like designing backwards. I know where I want to go, so this is our end goal, and it's almost like, I'm also thinking of like marching orders or whatever,
Right.
like a general saying, this is what we're going to do, and you're going to do it, and they go, okay, and they just move out and do whatever they're told. So those devices are saying, I will get it done based on this end goal of how the network's supposed to look like.
Right. So it doesn't matter whether or not you and I configure it. The neat thing, though, Vaughn, it's going to be done every single time the way that the DNA Center says to be done. So, Vaughn, if you get tired after working with 2 or 3 switches and go, I'm just going to do it this way because I'm tired of doing it the other way that I was doing it all the time, the Cisco DNA Center never gets tired of doing that. It just goes and says, I'll do it 50 times, 100 times if I need to, exactly the same way.
And it sounds like what you're saying as well, like consistency.
Right.
So that way, like the DNA Center is going to do it this way for these switches, for this area of the network. And so then you have that consistency across everything.
Right.
Of we're all speaking the same language.
Exactly. So with that single management portal, Vaughn, all that you and I have to do is really understand that idea of intent is what we have to do. Now let's take a look at the way that the management portal looks like so that we understand a little bit more. Now, Vaughn, we're just showing the idea of the portal itself. And this is like everything else, is just a simple dashboard. So a lot of things are actually going on here. There's not anything that's really in this particular Cisco DNA Center, but you do see where it actually is managing even 24 different sites, okay, around that we know the way that we have it. There's only one device that's actually here as far as the demo goes.
And I was just going to ask, like, this is from Cisco's demos.
It
so, okay, so this
Yep.
is something that you have access to
Right.
that Cisco has given us to demonstrate this.
Right. Yeah. So actually, anybody
double checking that one.
yeah. Believe it or not, anybody will be able to get access to this. They'll be able to use the demonstration here so they can explore a little bit more. You won't be able to configure a lot. The reason why is that we need to talk about this idea of the configuration a little bit more, but we don't tend to do it right here, right? Because what this is doing is saying, what do you want to expressly manage? What is it that you want to do? So we're, again, expressing intent. But the idea of the management, though, comes a little bit differently. But before I get in that, because I want to jump ahead and then I'll go backward and I'll get everybody confused here. But we want to talk about this thing right up at the top. And you'll see that there's essentially different things that they really want us to focus on. Design, okay? Then the idea, of course, is what do we really want the network to actually look like, okay? Policy, how do we essentially make sure that that ends up happening for us, along with the idea of assurance, okay? And then provisioning allows us to be able to implement or deploy our devices the way that we want. And then, of course, even the idea of the platform here, okay? So all those are actually different management components, and each one of them, believe it or not, could probably take multiple episodes for us to get through. So we're not really diving in that point. We want to have an overall understanding of what we're seeing here. 100% healthy devices is exactly what we're looking for. But if there is something unhealthy, then we can also spot it here too, okay? So Vaughn, I'm just going to take a look at design because that's kind of the easiest way to be able to do this, is that right now, I can see that across at least the entire globe and world here. See if I can move that over a little bit, okay? So all these different centers that we see, and you can see that there's multiple ones here, 1, 2, 4, 7, whatever is actually here, okay? So these are the different sites, including some around the other side of the, that we have the ability to do. And in that sense, if I wanted to add in more to manage, I simply click on the add, and then I can add in an area, and then I can add a building in that particular area. If I wanted to get very granular, I can even add a floor within that building, within that area, to actually see. So I get great visibility out of this in terms of the design and how I want this to happen. Along with that, we have the idea of image repositories here. So we can even manage images with our Cisco DNA Center as well, deploying it when we choose to, or actually not deploying it when we don't need to. Create networking profiles for the centers, authentication templates, you name it as well, okay? Of course, you can also create different policies then, okay? So this one has different virtual network policies that are in hand, but notice you can do group-based access control, IP-based access control, applications, traffic. Virtual networks, you can create all these that then can be applied across different centers if we choose to. We can provision multiple devices, which there's no provisioning of devices right now. I don't have any unprovisioned devices because there's nothing. Oh, wait, oh, there we go. So right here, you can see where there's actually one particular router that we can actually provision out there too. So latest sync here, it says it is a partial failure as what's happened, and you can see it's currently not provisioned, and it tells me, hey, something has actually failed in its provisioning status. More than likely, the reason why it's failed, Vaughn, is we don't really have a router. We have the image for the router to actually being able to show up. So you can see all of this different stuff that's actually available for us. Once again, the overall health and assurance that we have the ability to do. That would be same thing as quality assurance. And then ultimate platforms that we can also, of course, be managed in. And this one is taking its sweet time and showing up, so we're not going to worry about that too much. But Vaughn, overall, when we start taking a look at something like the DNA Center, it has its advantages because it can give us things on such a global scale here, just like what we're seeing, the entire networking hierarchy here. And I can click on this and zoom in, and I can even see that right here, I can see in the Chicago-like area that I have 3 different sites. And right here, I can see there's, for one reason, Bangkok building number 1, a U.S. Bank, and building number 5. So all those are actually within that particular area. And then within that, you, of course, can have the U.S. Bank, and I can see even more information about it, the building, or even the floor to add in, so I can see all the devices that I want to be able to get in there, and then consistently add in policies and do all that management that I want. So Vaughn, overall, all these different positions here, right? The idea of the policy, the design, the assurance, all that can be managed in one interface.
Might be a silly question, but when they're saying floors and I mean, we're talking about like, hey, if we have an office building,
right,
across floors, that's what they're referring to.
Yep.
It's not like a special word
Nope.
in the Cisco language.
Yeah, no, they're literally saying that if you had a building with 4 floors and you had a switch on the 4th floor, you can actually put it there and it can report back to this particular console that says there's a problem with that building in Detroit on the 4th floor of this particular building, and even give you the ID so that you're not actually going, oh, there's a problem at the site. You know exactly where that device is. So that's how much detail you can drill into.
That's pretty neat. And of course, with like multinational companies, you can go ahead and have that one central location for everything all over the globe. So I was just making sure that, again, it wasn't specific terminology that I should be knowing about besides I'm talking about floors in a building.
Yeah, literally.
Okay, cool.
So Vaughn, with all that, right, I just showed you kind of the interface that most people are going to be using to manage it, to take a look at what's going on. But Vaughn, there wasn't really a lot there because we don't have a lot of devices to go in and drill down into those devices to make it work. But Vaughn, the neat thing about the Cisco DNA Center is not so much that we can go in and click on something and make it work or turn it off and turn it on and stuff like that. It is what, of course, Cisco is actually aiming towards, which is the realm of automation, okay? And that realm of automation means, well, again, programming and automation or orchestration and automation. All this stuff is available through the DNA Center. So that means if you learn a little bit of programming, you can begin to automate the idea of deployments, okay? You can design how things are actually going to look. You can provision. You can do the integration through some type of programming that you can learn about. You can also manage this, the idea of the software images that are actually in hand. Changing, you can change the routes. You can do all that through programming as well, okay? Assurance, you can do what we call guided remediations here, where you actually say step by step through how this is going to be done. In terms of updates, you can do automated types of updates that are also available out there, as well as actually go ahead and automate certain systems to pull up or to actually be created if you need to as well. And then lastly, we can verify that everything is actually working and provide deeper or more visibility into the world that we actually have. And of course, ultimately, with the automation, we can also do some type of correction if we need to. If something wasn't deployed correctly, it can go in and go, I did the verification, it didn't work. Let me redeploy this or let me check this out and change it up. And that will help us to work it out as well. So Vaughn, this is kind of that 50,000 foot overview again. We're not diving into the actual inner workings of everything that's going on, but at the same time, they are pushing this. And so in other words, Cisco is very proud of this particular product because it does bring everything to this particular interface that allows for someone that's not so great at programming and automation to begin to get their feet wet a little bit, but to at least see the end result of that. And they do have more where you can go in and do much more configuration if you have all the devices set up too. Now, Vaughn, I do have to mention, just like I did in a few episodes ago, if not in the very last episode, the very fact is this is not a cheap thing, okay? So this is not something that you can say, oh, let me just put a couple of dollars into it. Let me buy the device. This one requires you, of course, to actually be connected and everything else that you need to do. So this is more of a subscription type of service that's normally run in the cloud for what we want to actually be able to accomplish. So Vaughn, that is kind of at least the overview that we want to understand and the way that it can actually integrate into our networks to manage everything the way that we want to, due to what we call that intent-based networking is what we want. We're no longer being told what devices need to be managed. We're actually saying, I know that here's the devices that need to be managed, but this is what I want carried out on those devices. And it can maintain that for us and report back to us with any device that's not actually working and then fix it if we need to. So Vaughn, that's really the overall intent of what we wanted to make sure that we understand about the Cisco DNA Center.
All right. Sounds like consistency and efficiency, those great words that we all love. And of course, why we're even using DNA Center at all. So
right.
Great overview. Thank you, Ronnie. Thank you out there for joining us. But we're going to go ahead and sign off for IT Pro TV. I've been your host, Fawn Smith.
And I'm Ronnie Wong.
We'll see you soon.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.